very warm welcome to this information session about IS Essentials, which is our sustainability rating for smaller infrastructure projects. My name is Monique Isenheim. I'm head of market development at the ISC. And before we kick off, I would just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. We acknowledge their deep connection to land, water, and culture, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present and emerging. And Tina Kutu Kotoa to our attendees in New Zealand as well. Yeah, so we have a very diverse audience with various levels of experience with the IS ratings today. And so for today, we are going to start with a general overview of the ISC and our ratings. Then we will cover IS Essentials and the pilot process we are currently running. And then afterwards, we will take a more detailed look at the difference between our existing IS ratings and IS Essentials, specifically for those of you who are more familiar with the existing ratings already. We will also finish off with a Q&A, so feel free to pop in your questions at any time they come up, and we will attend to them at the end. Okay. So, starting off with about the ISC. ISC was established about 10 years ago, and it is now the peak body for infrastructure sustainability in Australia and New Zealand. Oh, we've got the slides foreseen, just one. Yeah, thank you. So we're a membership-based, not-for-profit organization, and we're working collaboratively to drive best practice and leadership to transform the sector. So going to the next slide. You will see that we've got over 200 membership organizations across the supply chain of infrastructure, really. So proponents, designers, contractors, suppliers, and we're also increasingly speaking to financiers. And if we're going to the next slide, our products and services are really built around the IS Essentials, the IS rating scheme, which is really the core of what we're doing. And this is supported by events such as this one, our annual conference, knowledge sharing and thought leadership, advocacy, and then training and development as well. Okay, so what are IS ratings and how do they work? So the scheme is deployed across Australia and New Zealand. And as we speak, we've got ratings happening in all of the states and territories in Australia and also in New Zealand. The scheme is applicable to all types of infrastructure assets, from ports and airports to rail and road and energy and water. And to date, we've got over 200 projects that are either certified or currently undergoing certification. And that amounts to about $200 billion of CapEx. Going to the next slide. And it's worth also mentioning that a couple of government agencies and state-owned entities and private asset owners are mandating IS ratings, and that's usually based on the capital value threshold. And so what does that look like? How does that work? We've got ratings for the entire supply life cycle of the asset. So starting with the planning rating, then design and as-built, and the operations rating. And IS Essentials, which is the focus of today, and we're currently developing, spans across design and construction at this point. And the way you go about it is it starts with the registration of the project. Then you get ISC project manager assigned, and you've got a person on the project side that is the assessor and brings together all the evidence and documentation to support their submission. Then there is a verification by an independent third party. And then depending on the level on your score and the level of certification, you get your certification, and that goes all the way from bronze up to diamond. So what are the reasons and benefits for taking up an IS rating? The IS ratings are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and they're spanning across the 4 dimensions of governance, environment, social, and economic. And then we've got credits that are aligned with categories that sit under that. So really it is about measuring and managing what matters. And then if we look at the next slide and taking a more focused look at climate, we can see that about 70% of all greenhouse gas emissions in Australia relate to infrastructure in some way or form. And that's also, again, across the life cycle of the infrastructure asset, starting with the planning. And so we can really make an impact here if we're applying sustainability practices. And so what do the credits look like? Just to give you an example, as mentioned, they're aligned with the sustainability development goals across a number of categories. And you see an example of a credit here. It usually starts with the name and the intention of the credit. And then you've got typically 3 levels. And the higher up you go with the levels, the more scores you will get for achieving those. We should say that compliance as such does not get you any points, because that's considered as usual. And really the goal here is to shift what the benchmark is for sustainability and infrastructure. And then taking a broader look, we have recently published our impact report for this year. And without going into all the detail, but you can see that there's a significant impact of the rating across a number of dimensions. So that's from materials to energy, water and waste, as well as some of the social dimensions. And then looking at societal return on investment, we have commissioned a study, and based on that, looking into the future, we expect a significant societal return on investment for sustainable infrastructure. And really, we expect at least a return on investment of $1.60 per each dollar spent. And that's really just across those dimensions that are easier to quantify. So material savings and carbon savings. It does not yet take into account some of the social and harder to qualify and quantify elements, such as the benefits of open space and health and personal development. And then next. Yeah, also worth pointing out, we have recently published 2 reports that are really speaking to placemaking and how sustainable infrastructure can create thriving nations, and also support local strategies to achieving net zero. We will post the links in the chat later, but really what we're seeing is, as a proponent, by requiring an IS ratings, you're really procuring outcomes. So in summary, then, the benefits of a rating scheme, you do drive sustainability outcomes that correspond with your sustainability strategy. It's a systematic and recognized approach across the whole lifespan of the infrastructure asset. It allows you to benchmark the assets against others, and it manages reputational risks and recognition. And all of that can be measured through direct and indirect impacts and financial return on investment. And now I'm handing over to Giovanni Negroni, who's a project manager at ISC, and he'll talk you through IS Essentials in more detail.
Thank you. Thanks, Monique. I'll give you a brief introduction on IS Essentials, and then I'm sure that Ty will touch a little bit more on those technical aspects of the tool. So IS Essentials was born to create a more proportional pathway for projects that have a capital value under $100 million. And the idea is to create something nimbler that we can tailor to local government projects, but not only, also water authorities and any sort of other projects that have a smaller but still significant capital value. It was built from version 2.1 of the Design and As-Built Technical Manual, as Monique said earlier. And this is the latest update of our technical manual for design and construction. But as I said, it has a reduced complexity and scale. And I believe Ty will explain a little bit more on how that's been achieved. One of the ways we're also targeting the complexity or the scale factor is by introducing the digital a digital platform. So this will be ISC's first digital rating, which is quite an achievement. And that's thanks to the Innovation Fund that we achieved thanks to the Westpac New Zealand government fund. So this is just a brief introduction. I'm going to now take you through the pilot phase. We are currently at the pilot phase of this tool, and it's a flexible process. So we are still accepting new projects, but at the moment we have 18. If we can see the next slide, you'll see how these are spread across the industry. So first of all, we started about a year ago, and these are our projects at the moment, but we're still taking on more, and we're discussing with many different proponents across Australia and New Zealand. The capital range that we're covering with these projects is quite broad, and it's basically the whole range that we're targeting, so $8 million all the way to $100 million. As you can see in the slide, we're covering a very broad variety of assets, and you can find the what I like to call the usual suspects in there. Road and railway projects, they certainly have a higher level of maturity with IS ratings, but we're also looking at extremely important market sectors for us, such as ports and social infrastructure like boardwalk and swimming pools. And as I said before, we have several water authorities that are joining in this pilot phase. So we're trying to, our philosophy is the more diverse, the better. We're trying to test these two in the pilot phase, and the more diverse our projects, we think the better outcome we'll achieve. So especially if you're a proponent that have no experience or little experience to IS Essentials, feel free to reach out. I'm going to repeat this quite a few times during the presentation, but this is why we're here. Next slide, please. The pilot process is very similar to what Monique described earlier and touched on regarding the design and as-built tool. So we start here with providing a little bit more support in the initial phase, and that's why you see that initial project assessment there on the left. The idea is to discuss at a high level your project and see if it's suitable. Then if we find that it is suitable, we draft the rating agreement, and once that's executed, we kick off the project and move into the assessment phase. The assessment phase is divided into materiality assessment and assessment submission on this slide. Ty will run you through the materiality assessment later, but in short, it's the way you tailor the tool to your project and distribute the points. The big self-assessment here is in that assessment submission phase, where you'll provide all the evidence to us, and then we'll liaise with the external verifier, and that's the verification step. Once that's done, then certification is the final step, and the certification award levels are very similar to, are actually the same as version 2.1. So that hasn't changed, but we're really not looking for scores here. This is all about feedback. Obviously, we will give a certification, there will be a score at the end, but that's not what the pilot phase is about. The pilot phase is about testing the tool, receiving feedback, and then shaping that final draft of the tool so that it is appropriate for the industry. Next, please. This is an example. We wanted to share with you an example from the manual, the technical manual, so that you could see how it can look like and what type of detail you can find in the technical manual. One of the credits that you'll find at the front of the manual is Leadership 1, or LEA 1. And as you can see here on the screen, most credits are divided between the two phases: design, which is an interim certification, and then as built, which is the final one. The criteria are provided here in the table, and you can see they're divided into levels, level 1, 2, and 3. There's an intent on the top, and then you don't see it here, but there's also additional guidance for each one of those criterion. I've highlighted one just to show you the type of statement that you can find. That's DL31. That stays for Design Level 3.1, and its performance against sustainability targets is publicly reported. It's a short sentence. If you then need more information, which you need to have a look at the additional guidance that we provide, and there are more must statements or requirements in the technical manual for each one of these criterion. So it is a level, it is a high level of detail here, but there is a lot of details in the technical manual, and there's a lot of guidance available. Next, please. So why joining? Why should you join the Essentials pilot phase? Obviously, there are several benefits of achieving a rating scheme, as Monique has very well explained earlier. And first of all, it's definitely the one to achieve measurable sustainability outcomes. But also with the pilot phase and the ICE Essential, you can contribute to build some capacities, to build structures within your company, and KPIs included. You can also use it to improve your stakeholder engagement, and ultimately, if and when you get the certification, there is an opportunity for promotion and joint communication. For us, obviously, the feedback is crucial, as I said before, so joining a pilot phase will help to shape the final tool and what that would look like. In terms of participation, how do you get involved? How do you get involved with us? Very simple. Just reach out after this this webinar. If you're interested, reach out to us, and we'll help you. We'll take you through each step. What's included in the pilot phase is listed here on the slide. Definitely will give you a certification, although remember, we're not really about points and numbers at this stage. We're looking at outcomes and feedback in particular. There will be training included, and I'll touch briefly on training on the next slide, I think. And then you'll obviously get support. You have a dedicated project manager, in this case, someone like me who will be helping you along the way. And then, as I said before, promotion or joint communication and the opportunity to write a case study. What are the requirements on the other side? There's an upfront fee. $30,000 includes the support that we give, so includes my time and my work, but also the verification fees, so the external party who is verifying your work. And then second requirement is obviously in terms of resources, your internal resources. That's a very important one as well. You'll need to think whether you have internal capacity or if you want to hire a consultant with experience in the delivery of IS ratings to help you along the way. One comment I'll add on the pilot phase is the opportunity to target, I would say, smaller projects, but not necessarily more projects along under one umbrella that we've called here program. And the idea is still in development, so reach out if you need more information about this. But we are looking for opportunities to maximize the efficiency by gathering and bundling multiple credits and making sure that those can be achieved at a program level, so that we create efficiencies in the verification process. So this is something that we're working on. And again, if you're interested, just let us know if you feel like this could apply to your program of projects. And I appreciate here the language can be used differently between portfolio, program, projects, packages. There's a lot of different jargon out there, but that's why we kept it very simple on this slide. If you're interested, please reach out. Here is the training slide I promised. There's a lot happening right now in our learning department team, and we have in Gen 2023, we'll have a free self-paced module coming out for ICE Essentials. It will be available to everyone and accessible through our website. It will probably look like something like the slide you see there on the right. And on top of all that, you'll have access to case studies, fact sheets, and also additional information that will help you to get started, and will give you some more indication on the eligibility and applications of the tool. I'll wrap it up with a case study. This is the first pilot project that was recently certified and or verified, I should say. I think they're still pending the last bit, the certification, but the project's completed, very successful. It's the channel beacon replacement project in northern Queensland. As you can see here on the slide, you can see the feedback from the proponent, and they have achieved some amazing outcomes here. I'll just mention a few. They thought that the rating process really helped and enhanced the collaboration, and that moved them to generate further innovation in their project. And some of these innovations are there in those bullet points at the bottom. You'll see the lanterns they use had solar panels installed on, and they've used some different types of reflecting wrapping, and also stainless steel ladders that will help in extending the lifespan of their assets. So yeah, a good example of how IS Essential has been used. Thank you. I think this is the last slide, so I'll pass it to Ty, who will then give you more technical details on how IS Essentials is working.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Welcome, everyone. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Ty Momberg, and I'm a technical manager with the IEC. I'll be giving you an overview of the IS Essentials technical development process so far. Next slide, please. So as you can see from the slide, there are about 10 developments or approaches that we are working on to reduce the scale and complexity of the IS Essentials tool. And we have already done a lot of work and thinking on some of these, and others are still being developed and in the process of being worked through. For example, we have clear pathways on initiatives like the reductions in credits and criteria, the updated materiality assessment, and the new approach to base case, while others still require further development and thinking, including initiatives such as that organizational program approach that Gio was talking about, and also, for example, templates and examples, i.e. which credits need these the most and what format will they be and how will they look. And then also, as Gio said, we are looking to digitalize this tool, and that is very much still being worked at. The idea for today's session is not to go through all the details of all the above, but I'm just going to talk broadly about 4 of these approaches to provide you a sense of these developments. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So the first development that I'll be providing an overview of is item 2 on that previous list. It's credit criteria, deletions, and modifications. So this is the same credit that Gio was talking to before, and you can see some of the work that we've done behind the scenes. The items, red box in the slide, clearly communicate what this development item is all about. So it was the review of every single credit in the version 2.1 technical manual, and then the deletion and or modification of specific criteria or parts of criteria to make them more relevant and applicable to smaller projects in terms of scale and complexity. So on this particular example, it's the same credit that Gio showed you before. And you can see what we've done in level 2 is we've actually taken that public reporting requirement out of level 2 and moved it across to level 3. And then the previous level 3 requirements have just been deleted entirely. And we think this is a lot more appropriate for smaller projects. And overall, so far, we've made well over 100 of these types of changes as we've gone through the process. Next slide, please. Thank you. The next item is materiality assessment. And firstly, I'm just going to talk and explain a little bit how the materiality assessment process works across all the tools. So to achieve a rating and to measure performance, the IS rating scheme has a point scoring system, which is adjusted or tailored to fit the profile of each asset through the materiality assessment process. Each project goes through a materiality assessment where the project team answers specific questions about their project which identify its risks and opportunities, reflects the stakeholders' priorities, and gives more weight and points to these areas. Next slide, please. And one of the major developments that we've been working on for Essentials is an updated version of this materiality assessment process specifically for Essentials. This is one of the bigger, meatier developments to help reduce the scale and complexity of the rating tool for smaller projects. As you can see from the slide, the materiality assessment for Essentials is very closely linked to the project's capital value. You can see the capital band on the left-hand side. And for projects in a capital band of under 20 million, there are only 20 credits screened in. And when we say screened in, we mean available to them. And then for the next band, which is 20 to 50 million, there are 25 credits screened in. And then the last band, which is 50 to 100 million, there are 30 credits screened in. The points are redistributed once the screening process has been undertaken. And as you can see, the intent is obviously that smaller projects do less. It's important to note that there are no compulsory or mandatory credits in the Essentials tool. I think some pilot projects maybe haven't understood this necessarily, and we're trying to make that very clear. So absolutely no compulsory or mandatory credits. These are the credits that are screened in and therefore available to, but it doesn't mean that projects have to do all of them. This development and all the others are being tested by pilot projects to see if they work in the real world. And that's kind of, again, as Gio was saying in his presentation. Next slide, please. Great. So this is the base case approach. And this is another one of the fairly meaty or larger developments to help for Essentials projects. And it has two main benefits. The first one, it reduces the amount of modeling required by projects, as it's actually more based on actual data. And then secondly, it increases the accuracy of the base case as a result of using more accurate data rather than models. How does this work? I think I just need to take a step back, really, as some of you might not be familiar with the previous process. So I am simplifying it a bit, but basically the previous approach required projects to model a base case or business as usual, construction footprint plus operations footprint at the very earliest stages of the project. And then that was compared to actual footprints. So for any of you involved in the design, I'm sure you have experienced that any assumptions or modeling done at the very early stages of design are very rarely match the final product or development in all aspects. So we've taken a new look at this. And the new methodology uses a reverse calculation from the actual back to a more aligned and relevant base case in both the design and as-built stages. So you actually start with the actual and work backwards towards the business as usual base case. I'm sure I've probably confused a lot of you, and this is really tricky to explain, but I think the next slide should hopefully clarify things. So here you can see the actual, which is that blue block on the left-hand side, bottom left, and that is now the starting point. So the actual is the starting point. Then the reverse calculation occurs, and which includes adding all the project sustainability initiatives and savings back onto the actual. So those are all the green initiatives to calculate a more accurate and relevant base case. Just to repeat, the actual is now the starting point, not the modeling undertaken at the very earliest stages of the project. Obviously, all those initiatives and savings that are added back need to be justified and evidenced, but we believe that this is a more accurate method for calculation and also an easier process to follow. Next slide, please. Great. Development item 6 on that initial list is the organizational program approach. This development is to recognize and enable that work undertaken as part of a program of works or at the organizational level may be used to meet credit criteria or parts of credit criteria within an IS submission and therefore recognize the efficiency of these scenarios. As Gio was saying, this development is still in the early stages and requires further work and thinking. And again, we're working with the pilot projects as well as the technical working groups to develop a solution that can maximize efficiencies in the real world. Next slide, please. Cool. So as discussed above, many aspects of the Essentials tool are still in development, and we're working with the pilot projects and working groups as we go. This involves a flexible, reiterative process of testing as we develop. And this is enabling us to bring an appropriate and tested tool to the market at the end of the process. The technical manual started as a draft Rev 1 in mid-2021, and we have brought Rev 3 to the market in March 2022 for further pilot testing and for the working groups to review and comment on. Draft 3 was based on feedback that was already received at that point, and also an in-depth analysis undertaken by the appointed technical consultant, who was LOSI Consulting, and a massive shout out to LOSI Consulting, thank you very much, as well as the ISC's internal technical panel, or ITP. As detailed in this slide, piloting projects will be at a minimum expected to undertake a rating utilizing the Essentials resources available to them at the time of their kickoff, which is still draft 3 at this point in time. So that is a very high level overview of the technical development process so far. And now I'm going to hand back to Monique. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. We have a good amount of time left for questions, and I've seen a few come in with the Q&As already. Feel free to add any more. But yeah, we'll move over to those doing now. So the first question is from Jock McFarlane. Can you please explain the level of feedback needed? Is this for each credit or in general, etc.? Gio, I hand this one to you, and then we can build.
Yep, happy to take that question. The level of feedback that we are receiving at this stage is detailed to the level of the credits. It's not a mandatory requirement, so it's not something that will ask specifically from your side, but the more feedback we receive, the better. So it's certainly encouraged. In particular, I'd like to add that it depends really on which targets you have. If you're targeting certain credits and you'll have more time to review them, then you may be able to provide more feedback on such credits. Whereas if you're not targeting others, of course, your feedback may be partial. So, but yes, the level needed is definitely at the credit level. If possible, we'd definitely appreciate that.
And I was just going to add to that, I guess, from a tool or technical development process, any questions that you have through the process is actually feedback too. So all questions that pilots are kind of sending through to us, how do we do this? What does this mean? We kind of taking those into consideration and looking very carefully at those. Are we thinking, is that just a project specific thing because they're in scenario A or B, and is that just relevant to them? Or is that actually a gap or a possible consideration we need to include and think about for the whole tool? And therefore, is it something that we then need to maybe make some sort of change? So every single question that comes from the pilots is also feedback, and we take all of those into consideration. And then the other thing is we've had a really good workshop the other day with the 18 pilot projects, gathering all their feedback on some specific questions. And there is kind of a survey and a set of questions that exists out there for those pilots at the same time.
Yes, and just to build on that as well, apart from the purely technical feedback, we're also really interested in learning how the process looks like on your end, how we can help that make that really efficient and effective. So that spans the support from the project managers, that spans the training, any commercial elements as well. So it's really yeah, getting the big picture and not just for the technical components. Okay. The next question from Michael Wilson, what maximum timeframes are you looking at for pilot projects? So I think I can answer that. We are taking in pilot projects for the rest of the year and at least the next quarter, so the first quarter of the next calendar year. And then at some point there will be a transition from when the pilot projects move into actual projects. So once the IS Essentials is launched, there will be a bit of a transition, but at the very least until the first quarter of the next year, we're taking in pilot projects.
Yeah, that actually just brings up, I don't think there's one thing that we mentioned, which is the date of the kind of launch. There isn't an exact date yet, but we are aiming for the end, towards the end of next calendar year, so end of 2023, as a digital product is the targeted launch date for that tool.
Yeah. Few more coming in. Yeah, just picking. So a question from Ross Brookshaw: what is the approximate cost or recommended resources required to administer the IS Essentials rating? So excluding the initiatives and so all the activities that go with it. And that's a very relevant and fair question that we're being asked very often. Unfortunately, it's not one where we can give you a single one-sentence answer. It really depends on quite a few things. It depends on the scope and the complexity of the project. It depends on the starting point of the organization that does the assessment. So if you've already got a fair bit of experience with IS ratings, that will help. If you've got sustainability measurements and systems and frameworks in place, that will also help. In general, you need a person internally who's really dedicated to doing this, and they will need to work with other people within the organization to gather all the evidence and documentation in order to do the assessment. Some of our pilot projects have opted to bring in external consultants and work hand in hand with them, and that's been working really well. A lot of those, nobody knows the IS Essentials tool because we're just piloting it, but some of those external consultants know the IS ratings very well. And since IS Essentials is a smaller version of it, that usually is really helpful. So yeah, unfortunately it's hard to give you a number or a percentage FTE, but if you have a specific project in mind, we can probably give you some guidance as to when we understand the scope.
It also depends on the capital band of that project, because if they're working to 20 credits which are screened in, or 25 or 50, and then it's not just the number of credits that are screened in, it's actually the number of credits that are targeted. We are doing some kind of analysis behind the scenes, and it is actually possible for a project targeting a bronze rating in the sub 20 million category to achieve, if they achieve just 3 credits at level 3, they were able to achieve, or are able in theory to achieve, a bronze rating. That's obviously the credits that have the highest weighting and therefore the most points associated with them. But if you put that into context, it's really, yeah, what capital band is your project? What are you looking to do as a proponent and as a project team? We think as a new tool that a really good starting point for most proponents is targeting a bronze rating and then going from that point. But that again would be up to the specific proponent and project team.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess a question related to that from Mike around supporting the development of a business case. Again, that will be highly individual for each of the projects, but we can certainly help you with some general guidance as to what the return on investment is, both the quantifiable ones and the not quantifiable benefits. There are also some free and some paid training and information sections in our training and development that can help bring the whole organization on board and give them a basic understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it, which can help with making the case for an IS Essentials rating as well. So yeah, if you've got any specific projects in mind, it's probably worth connecting and having a chat about that. Okay. So I'm gonna go to Roma's question. Is there flexibility with screening in credits? Are there a number of credits included in IS 2.1 that are not included in IS Essentials? If these are applicable to the projects, they be screened in?
I can start on that one. So I think there were 4 credits that were kind of taken out completely when we went from 2.1 in entirety. So it dropped from 38 to 34, and then the banding process applies. So at this point, a project of say just under 100 million would have a maximum of 30 credits screened in. I think we have had some comments and questions from pilot projects on that very point, and therefore what we're considering at the moment and the recommendation to our internal technical panel is that all projects should be able to screen in additional credits if they want to. And we think it's going to be self-policing in the sense that if you are at that band level and you want to target all 34 credits, and that's up to you as a project, because it would obviously involve more work. There's more work associated with more credits, but that would be the project's choice. We currently have not had the question about excluding credits outside of the Essentials 2N, and at this point, from the top of my head, we probably wouldn't, but as a pilot project, send that in. That's something we can definitely look at and think about. So yeah.
Okay. Elisa, yes, the criterion for IS Essentials is at the moment we're purely looking at the CapEx. So anything up to $100 million can do an IS Essentials rating. Okay. A question from Glenn. Projects that are less than $100 million often go for short durations, 2 years, sometimes even 6 months. What is the rationale for having a design and as-built as opposed to just a final as-built rating?
Yeah, I can give that a go again, start off. Firstly, I think it's a really good question. And actually, that is one of the things that we're still thinking about and haven't landed on an exact answer yet. I guess where we're currently sitting is that in our experience, projects typically do a lot better if things are thought about at earlier stages and embedded in kind of contract documentation rather than left to the last minute. That's obviously a very important consideration. However, at the same time, I think you do have a point. There are shorter timeframes associated with this. Some of the current thinking is that when there is a program of works or an organization involved, that somehow that level of detail could be shifted onto them at that point. Again, getting all the processes set up, getting the requirements embedded so that when any particular contractor takes on the work, it's very clear what they have to do and how they have to do it. But that is still something that we haven't landed on an exact answer yet. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
I think I can just add very briefly that even if the verification process was only targeting the as-built phase, the design requirements would still be there. So that happens already in version 1.2, or it has happened, where we've defined the as-built only approach. That doesn't exclude the design phase. It just makes it a little bit harder to achieve it because there is no verification in the middle, so there is no checkpoint. So I would assume that an assessor is proceeding in the dark without knowing what their reference point is. They may be thinking they're doing an extremely good job, and then in as-built finding that maybe they were not, or the other way around. But yeah, just wanted to clarify that part.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And then we've got the question from Stephen about the anticipated timelines and whether there will be a phase when there's no ratings project for smaller projects. I think in terms of timing, we're aiming to launch IS Essentials at the end of next year, which is also, I believe, when the 1.2 will phase out. So it should go hand in hand. But I'm not sure, maybe Ty, can you say something about, or Joe, about using 2.1 for small projects? I think that's also a possibility, isn't it?
I think I don't see a problem with all this. I know, version 1.2 is meant to be phased out, but it's still available in certain states. In others, version 2.1 has already been the choice. There would be no problem to use version 2.1 for small projects, but I would still encourage any projects to use the IS Essentials, whether it's a pilot or not. Ultimately, the tool is there to be used. But yeah, definitely version 2.1 in other states has been the way forward. So it could be applicable as well for smaller projects.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo what you're saying, and that I guess my recommendation would be for smaller projects to use the Essentials tool, either in the pilot or then moving to that final version. I think that, it's been bought for that particular purpose.
Okay, that leads us to the end of the questions in the chat box. So I hope this was helpful for you and you got a good idea of what IS Essentials is and how it works. If you have a project in mind, if you would like to find out more, please contact any of the panel members or myself, and we can then have a conversation specifically about what you're looking at. And yeah, we'd be really happy to have a few more pilot projects on board. So if you want to be one of the first ones, please come on board.